and said, "We've got Game of Thrones." And I said, "Oh, is that what I was working on?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Okay, brilliant. Do I get a job out of this?" And he said, "Absolutely." There's things like large ladies for sale on the walls and stuff like this.
Hello and welcome to the Sketchy A.F podcast. My name is Jonathan, and today I am joined by artist Will Simpson, a man who has had a huge career across comics, television, and film, with work for some of the largest companies, including Transformers for Marvel UK, Batman Legends of the Dark Knight, and Hellblazer for DC, as well as multiple feature film storyboards and a little TV show you might have heard called Game of Thrones. Will, how are you today?
Oh, I'm good. No.
You said you were doing a little bit of convention work there, so how's it all going for you?
Well, no, I was at the Enniskillen Comic Fest at the weekend, and it was a blast. And it was mostly old 2000 AD chums and all the new guys that are doing amazing stuff. New guys, as in they've been working there for about 10 years. So the thing is, it's amazing actually. You run into all of these guys, and it's like, oh my God, their work's so good. Oh my God, their work's so good. Oh my God, their work's so good. And then you're wondering in the end, where do you fit in amongst all of this? But it was good. I had a very nice time, met lots of nice people, and had a lot of big conversations. Yeah, so all good.
Very good to hear. I kind of talked in the last episode. I was speaking to a great illustrator called Kyle T. Webster, but I started off by talking to him a little bit about how I kind of came across him and his work and why I invited him on the show because being in this position, I get to kind of choose the people that I would like to have conversations with, and I had a bit of connection from him that I spoke to. But when I talk about how I actually met you and became aware of your work, it's a little bit of a different story. I remember growing up and Will would show up kind of a bit like the Grim Reaper at regular family funerals, and that would have been that was generally my experience. To me, there was
What?
Will, and he
What?
was
I never once had a flipping sign in my
never had the costume. To be fair, it would be very, very poor etiquette for a week. But all I knew was my uncle Colin was here, and some of his friends were here. One of them was this nice fella called Will, and talked to you a little bit every now and then. But I was a child a lot of those times, and then once I moved down to Belfast and I was living there, we would have met semi regularly when I came along to the likes of Cafe Renoir when you and my uncle would have been sat there. And the first time, and I'd already by this point spoke and had drinks and coffee with you on a few different occasions, but there was one point where I showed up and I had my iPad with me. And at the time, I was using it to read a lot of comic books. And at that time, I was just reading Hellblazer. And I think you had asked me something like, "Oh, what are you reading there?" And I told you, "Oh, just reading this comic book." And I would always give that introduction because I wasn't aware if anyone would even know anything. It's just this comic book, this American thing. And you just kind of went, "Have you read the issues I illustrated?" I just remember thinking, "What? What? What's going on here?" And then you told me, I think it was about your first issue was maybe 4 or so issues ahead of where I was at the time. So I quickly, I'm scrolling through the screen here, and all of a sudden, there it is, Will Simpson, the name there. And I remember thinking, what the hell? Like, it was such a crazy moment. I thought, how is this man who I've met on multiple occasions, who my uncle's known for so long, and he's never mentioned that he's had this incredible career in the comic book industry? It's just a crazy situation.
Well, Colin, he doesn't like to to blow about anybody. He's very calm.
No.
He's a character, great company that you can end up. You normally just talk rubbish with. It's fantastic.
What I think, like, it was kind of, I remember at the time, I was kind of like still at that point working towards the career in graphic design that I was pursuing at the time. And I remember actually, whenever we chatted away that day, but when I walked away from it, the kind of lasting impression that it left in me was I went on and then looked into more of the work that you had done. And, I'm seeing all this stuff like Judge Dredd. I'm seeing all of these brilliant titles you've worked on. And to see someone from your own country who has went on to have, I mean, let's be honest, even some of the titles I've mentioned there, it's the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the body of work that you've done. But I remember just thinking, oh, it is possible for someone from this country to go and have a career on more of an international stage. And I remember it being a very inspiring thing to me at the time. And I was just wondering, whenever I read out those list of accomplishments, or if you went and looked at everything that's listed in like a Wikipedia, like, how do you feel now when you look at this just incredible body of work that you've done over your career?
um, it's kind of like it's all the things that you were talking about, getting yourself inspired to do stuff. I didn't think when I started out that anybody from here could do that kind of work. It was always somebody else. It always seemed to be people that were you assumed were American. Um, you didn't even take the whole British end of things into your head because you still thought that they were American. As it turned out, so many of the people that I ended up working alongside were from Scotland, from Ireland, from Wales. It was very interesting how that Celtic nature of storytelling was something that actually, pervaded the whole lot. But from my own work, once I got into doing it, it was everything was a blast. It was like, oh, I'm drawing another comic page. I'm going to get paid for it. I'm drawing another comic page. I'm going to get paid for it. And you worked on the first thing that you worked on, and you were thinking, that's it. That's my life. I'm going to be doing this character forever. And of course, then the mag gets cancelled. That was Warrior, with Big Ben, the man with no time for crime, which was the first thing I did. And then I'd already been talking to Marvel because it was one of the reasons why I ended up doing Big Ben. But I get into doing Transformers for British Marvel, and again, then you're thinking, well, that'll never end, and you're just working away on a day to day basis, enjoying the fact that you're being paid to do artwork, and you basically are just enjoying your life. You're doing artwork. You're putting it out there. It's if I wasn't doing it, I would have probably been in a field painting a landscape because that's what I did before. I did a lot of landscapes and portraits and stuff. And the thing was, to me, it was just all artwork. So the idea of being adaptable is actually something that I think small countries kind of need to have. Most people, if they're good at anything, well, then how many ways can you use this? How many ways can you do this thing?
Yeah.
And yeah, because the thing is, it's like writers. Writers don't just write novels. Writers write all sorts of things. Writers write newscasts. They write their reviews of things. They write their theories of things. They write whatever the hell it is that comes to for them to do. Obituaries, whatever. The point is that you use whatever that skill you have. I mean, it's like I always thought that you know if you're good at anything, pursue it. The point
Yeah.
the point is it's your like in artwork, okay, it comes down to your style really. It's like if somebody has a style that pervades the work they do so that everything is consistently that style, eventually you're going to break through a barrier because somebody's going to link with this style. And I mean, the style is made up of all the flaws that we have. That's the other thing that I found out through life is that great artists, the reason we love the great artists is the flaws in their work. We don't see it as flaws, but it is the flaws in their work that
I
create
suppose we kind of look at it as that's their their distinctive little bit of personality in it.
absolutely. But think of it slightly another way, that it is the things that they're trying to eradicate that we end up loving. And it's for me, it's like all the artists whose work I loved, from the from Renaissance painters all the way down to my greatest comic book favorites. Every one of them have these beautiful flaws. The work they turn out is their style. It's
Yeah.
not copying somebody else's style. It's their style. They may be influenced by masses of people's style, but in the end result, it's how do we do it? And for me, every comic page has been trying to get rid of the things that were problems to me, things that I found hard to draw. And you end up drawing them in your style, even though you don't realize you have a style. It's only when other people tell you this, or when other people say, I recognize that, I knew it was a Will Simpson, you're going, oh God, how does this happen? Because you don't see it. Um, and now I kind of know what I do. So I just accept these things. You start accepting the flaws, and it's not that you go with flaws because you're always trying to make your stuff better. But even so, everybody else recognizes it as you. So sorry, I know that's deviated from whatever
No,
the
no, not at all. I mean,
but it's
conversational. That's the way I want to sort of keep it.
when you're asking me, how I would feel about all getting into that and doing all that, it really was a case of, oh my God, the luck is with me. This is amazing. And I mean, there was loads of periods in my life where you weren't, you weren't employed with doing stuff, but you ended up in a sense, employing yourself. You got on with the next idea that you had. You did another painting, you did something else because you can do those things. And you just know that something else will come along a bit later.
I do think that there is a thing in our country in particular where you don't always think that you had mentioned it yourself when you were speaking there that you kind of think that everyone was American when you looked at the comic book industry. And I think that there's just a neat part of our culture where maybe we think a lot of people would look if you expressed ideas of doing anything that was in any way off the beaten path. They kind of look to you and think, "Well, who do you think you are?" And there seems to be culturally that kind of mindsets. And so I do think that that's kind of one of the first stumbling blocks that people do need to get over, especially if they're from this country, if they have that kind of cultural background, in order to try and push through that ceiling and to pursue a dream.
Well, the thing is that I guess there is something like that, but most of the time I was hidden away on my own in a room drawing pictures, so I didn't actually involve myself with too many people. So I wasn't necessarily getting the whole negative blast of being oh, you can't be better than yourself or whatever the hell it is. Anyway, the point is the only time I noticed it was when I went out to do signings at any place. I remember doing a Forbidden Planet signing in Belfast whenever I was working on 2000 AD at the time, and there was a guy. There's a guy came in. Was really excited to meet us all. There was a bunch of us there. I think Alan Grant might have been there as well, and I'd, you know, I'd kind of come where I was from where I was living to do the signing, and the guy said to me about uh, did it take you long getting here? And I said, no, no. And he said, are you enjoying being in Belfast? I said, yeah, Belfast is okay. You know, you know, been here for a while. Oh, good. Have you seen much of the city? Yeah, I've seen the city, and
Quite a lot.
and so did you fly in this morning? I said no, I drove from my house. Oh, you have a house over here? I said yeah, I live here. And the shock that was there was you could suddenly tell that he wasn't sure. Well, should I get him to sign something or not? He's only from here. Like everybody else, like Alan Grant was over from England, sounding incredibly Scottish, but there he was, and the other guys that were there were they were over from England, I think, as well. The point is that most of them were, as I say, Scottish, Welsh, or Irish, which was quite funny. Anyway, but it was that thing, that really strange sense of understanding that this guy doesn't now has to try and value me in a different way because he thinks I'm from here and not an
Yeah.
international thing. But the point was, my work was international.
Yeah.
That was all that mattered. And everything I've ever done, lots of the work I've done from here. When I was working for the Americans, I wasn't working in America. I was working for the Americans from here. It was I was living in Glenarm on the Antrim coast, and it was there I was in my house with my family, working away on comic strips through the night, and this was like for DC Comics in New York City, and this was like so cool. And I would go to the FedEx office every time I finished a section, and I would send it off, which was at the airport, which gave me an excuse to drive my car, which was all great fun because the rest of the time I wasn't doing any of that. I was sitting upstairs drawing away, and uh, and that's kind of the wonderful thing about doing artwork and doing comic artwork. You can do it anywhere, really. If you're confident enough in yourself, you can do it anywhere. I mean, I had my studio full of all the things I loved that were my reference material and my baby blanket, in a sense. It was like I was
Yeah.
comforted by the fact that all these great artists were in the books around my shelves. No, they still are, but I don't look at them the same way these days. I mean, these days it's kind of like, oh God, what have I got to do today? And it's like I must get on with it. I must get on with it. And that's kind of it, really. Now it's just a more comfortable thing. But back then it was enthusiasm, energy, flipping, the need to do stuff, and everybody can do that. That's the thing. It's
Yeah.
like it's not. If the one thing I could give to people would be don't worry about stuff. Just do your damn best all the time, and if
Uh-huh.
it takes longer than normal, well, that's okay because the point is it's only with practice and doing anything that you get better at. The same with writers. Writers can be angst-ridden over everything, but there's a point where they know what they can do, so then they know their words are epic. Everything they write is epic. And then that's when the arrogance gets in. They get so obnoxious that you don't want to work with
The arrogance and a few glasses of red
it.
wine, and
That's it.
everything's flying
But
off the
but
tracks.
they are such fun.
One of the things that I talked about on the channel here, and the whole reason that this YouTube channel started in the first place, was I kind of talked a lot about my own artistic journey, and especially me finding my way back into art after having not done it in about 12 years. And I was always really interested in hearing about other people's artistic journeys right from the very, very beginnings. And I was quite curious with, especially you talked about getting into the painting and stuff before you were doing a lot of the comic strips that you worked on. But was art just something that was always part of your life from as early as you can remember? Or do you remember how that love of art really came into your life?
It was from what my mother says, and she still says it today at 91. She still tells me the point was I was always drawing from
Yeah.
long back as she was, remembers. I was drawing. Now I don't remember the stuff that
Uh-huh.
she remembers, because if for me it was like I always think I was drawing, but I'm so unsure of uh, I mean, I don't see it because I lived it, but I would draw on the walls a little bit, and I would finally get to paper, and
Yeah.
and Mum was always really supportive of all this. My dad wanted me to become a mechanic. He thought, as time went on, and he realized I was still drawing. Well, when's he going to get out of this? He's got to have a proper job. He must become a mechanic, and but I with no interest in cars that way at all. I mean, now
Yeah.
I love driving them, but I can't pick one. But the thing is, mum was always that thing that seemed to look at you and realize, oh, he's got something special going on. Now, okay,
Yeah.
granted, my mum may have been demented, but the point is, her attitude about things
Poor
was,
mom.
oh, it was like, isn't it brilliant? You can become Van Gogh. And I'm thinking, what? I slice off my ear and commit suicide for my work, by work that nobody wants while I'm alive. It's like, no, Mom, I want to go down a different path. But it was very encouraging. She was very encouraging. And then there's that thing in primary school where you get to the last couple of years, and people are asking you to draw things. No, you're not a good
Yeah.
drawer, but you draw things better than other people, and you suddenly realize you've got something here, but it hasn't kind of clicked in your head properly, except that your interest in art is all consuming. You want to do stuff. And then you go into secondary school and you're working through that, and the art teacher takes a real interest because obviously whatever you're doing is better than what some of the other folks are doing.
Yeah.
And there's a certain gauge where they must kind of have a clear view that this person might go somewhere. But my art teacher, she gave me my first oil paints. She encouraged that side of things, and I went off, and I remember one whole summer where my work went from being the absolute crappiest I'd ever seen to gradually getting control of these things where it started to look like something. So within what was three paintings, I'd suddenly started to do stuff that I liked, as opposed to when I began, where you're kind of looking, going, "Good God, this is horrible paint," but it got good. And then I did my little bit of art college. That didn't work, and I went off doing my landscapes and portraits, and I just was, as I said, unemployed, enjoying actually being able to get out there and trying to do things, and then I would get commissioned to do a few things, and it became just like, wow, this is great. I love doing artwork, and I did. But at the same time, through all of that, I was always drawing comic strips for myself. So I
Yeah.
was adapting um, like Ray Bradbury science fiction stories, because Ray Bradbury was a brilliant science fiction writer, and I loved his short stories. Meant that there were things that there was a script there that you could actually probably deal with, and but most of the time I would do stuff, and after 2 pages in, that would have taken me a long time, I'd screw it all up, throw it away, and think, oh, that's terrible. And then I'd start another one, and I'd be so much better by the time I was doing the new one, because it's like I'd moved on from those 2 pages. And it's amazing how you advance quite quickly when you're young, where the pages change all the time because you're just pushing it a bit more. You're getting that a little bit
Yeah.
better time. So that's why you get really tired of the stuff that you've just drawn, 2 days before or 3 days before, where you can't look at it. Different in later life when you come across the stuff and you realize, God, that wasn't that bad. But at that time, your your need is to progress so much and to get something great happening. Anyway, the first finished comic strip I ever did for me, because it's on A4 paper and it's in really dark pencil, was a version of Ray Bradbury's Marionettes Incorporated, which is a story about a guy he can't deal with having to constantly pay attention to his wife, so he's told by a friend about this Android system that you can get an Android to look exactly like yourself, so you can leave that at home and you can go out and enjoy yourself, which is what happens, and then of course you can guess what way the story turns out.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but the it was a great little story, and I actually was amazed that I got to the end of it, and I still have that somewhere. It's in one of the boxes upstairs. It's like you kept things that you kept everything. That was the insanity, but you did keep things that you thought seemed to mean something to you, because the other thing is you think you'll never do another thing as good as the thing that's there.
Yeah.
And it's only a couple of years later, when you've actually done tons more stuff that's always better, that you actually go back and realize, okay, this was a stepping stone. But there's that thing. Time works differently when you're a kid.
It
It
was actually
really
quite
does.
interesting because I remember I mentioned earlier about kind of discovering after such a long period of time that you had this incredible career in comic books. And then it wasn't until much later beyond that I actually remember seeing some of the paintings that you did. And you did a lot of these kind of angel paintings, I believe. There were stuff that might have been going up. It might have been in your W5 show, if I
Mm.
remember.
I've
Yeah,
had
and these
I've
paintings,
had about three, 4 shows in W5, which has been really nice. Different,
I believe it
different.
was one of
Genre.
them was it specifically based on those kind of very they were all sort of angel characters, these females with the wings. I remember seeing the paintings and thinking they were fantastic.
Well, the thing about that was, I started drawing these beautiful angelic images whenever I was working on Hellblazer, because Hellblazer was dementing me.
Yeah.
Oh, Hellblazer! So it was so down in the gutter. I mean, and this was with Garth, and Garth is like, oh my God, that guy's head is somewhere else. Anyway, the point is that he was so down in the gutter of terrible, terrible things. Oh my God, they were terrible, and they were brilliant at the time. But
Yeah.
for some reason, I
Still to
was
this day it holds up brilliantly,
oh
that title.
yep. I get through an episode, and it was like I needed a break from all of that horror, and
Yeah.
so I started. I'd been asked to do a drawing um, of a friend, or I'd been asked to do a drawing for a card, and I used a friend to be in the artwork, and I'd taken a bunch of photographs to work from, because you can't get somebody to sit around all the time and for days while you're
Yeah.
working away. Um, but it was for like they were like magic cards, except it was for June. Actually, there was a series of cards being done for a game that was based on June, and so I did this painting. And that was a job, but then I realized, oh, there was other images I could draw. So I did a couple of other drawings, and then Rushing, who was in the images, her dad had seen the drawings, and her dad was a writer. And her dad asked her, "Do you think Will would be interested in illustrating my book?" She asked me. I said, absolutely, no problem. What because it was an ecologically sound book, which I didn't realize how much I was into, except at the time I was. And um, I ended up doing that book, a whole bunch of illustrations. You know the way old books used to be beautiful. They used to have illustrations all the way through
Yeah.
them, you know, and they were so good. Anytime you come across an old edition of something and it has its plates, it's fantastic. Anyway, I did that stuff, and it was for a company in the States called Percival Press, and I remember, oh, that seems like a nice bunch of books that they do. Mike, who was the writer, told me, "Oh yeah, I'm so pleased with these illustrations, and so is Vigo." And I said, Vigo who?" Mortensen, he said, he's the owner of the company. So I suddenly realized I just worked for Aragorn out of Lord of the Rings. Anyway, that was so cool. That was very, very cool. Anyway, but that's beside the point. Sorry, ooh, my tangential stories here. The
No,
thing
you're
is,
grand.
I the angel stuff I started drawing then, and it's not that I'm not religious. I'm just into wonderful, spirity, amazing stuff.
Yeah,
And so the thing was, it was I just kind of started doing this series of stuff that I really like. Now they're over a long period of time. Anybody that sees them, um, and there's a little book of them out. Anybody that sees them, the dates on them are over a long period, and of
uh-huh,
course, there's a big chunk of that was my Hellblazer period,
yeah,
and then it was something I just kept on doing as time went on until I kind of had a big exhibition in Belfast, which was there was I think it was 40 images up, a couple of big paintings and a whole bunch of the drawings, and that was like a point in time where I suddenly realized what it was all about. I could look at the display and I knew I needed more images in there, I needed more images in there, and I was telling a tale. And
yeah.
so that is still a continuing thing now, where I'm waiting. I bought out a little book that I called the Little Book of Angels, and it is a little book of angels because there's going to be the big book at some point, and that hopefully I'll have plenty of time to do. Anyway, we'll
Oh,
see.
that's exciting. Yeah.
Yeah,
If you've got
it's
a
just
link for the Little Book of
nice.
Angels, I'll stick it down under the video too.
It's it's just nice stuff, It's kind of just something more gentle in your life as opposed to the crazy stuff that I enjoy doing the rest of the time.
I mean,
Because
it
like
is such a stark contrast. That was one of the things that
it
struck
is,
me the most because I would
yeah,
have seen these images in particular. You're talking about doing so many at the time when you were illustrating Hellblazer. If anyone's ever read Hellblazer, it's about as dark as it gets when it comes to like most of those Vertigo titles would have been back in the 90s. But these paintings, and you said there, you mentioned that you weren't religious. It was more of you enjoy doing those spiritual things. And when I looked at them, I didn't get that religious connotation. When I looked at it, it was that I got that spiritual feel to it, absolutely. And that was one of the things that I find most interesting. It was like this softer side of the. Oh, what have we got?
that's my little book, my little book of angels. Whoops, there it goes.
Is beautiful. It's fantastic work, but it is it's great to see when you do see an artist who, if they become known for a particular style, to see whenever they go into a different area. And obviously, you were talking about painting before you ever got to the comic books.
Last one. Yeah, look at that. You
Oh, it's
see art
beautiful.
on screen by no computer technical mean whatsoever. It's in a book. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, no, not a problem at all. Always happy to see some lovely work, especially those ones were always ones that stuck with me. But one of the things that I was quite curious about is when you're moving into the comic book strips, they're obviously one of the most important things in any comic book. Arguably, some would say more important than the script itself is the art and how it's able to take that script and bring that story to life. Because really, for a reader or a viewer, when you're looking at a comic book, you could have a great script, but if someone isn't able to translate the emotion, the ideas, whether it's a kick-ass action scene or an emotional character building moment, if it's not visually put forward on the page, it doesn't work. It just doesn't have the impact, and the story itself can fall apart. And I was wondering, with that kind of the level of importance in illustration, what was your approach whenever you would receive a script and sit down to kind of draft out your pages? Did you have any particular way that you would work to make sure that you were conveying the correct messages?
Um, the process with turning out a comic page has always been the same with me. You get the script, you read the script, then you start rereading it and thumbnailing. The term thumbnail. So it's
Yeah.
like your where's my thumbnail? Anyway, they're small, little small doodles, and you work out all the images that seem to make sense through the doodles, and then you then start to try and arrange them, pardon me, in the way that makes sense on the page what is going to be the bigger shot, what's going to be the most important piece on that page. Um, then bearing in mind that you also have dialogue to go into it, which in the early
Hmm.
days I really didn't bear in mind. I kind of just did the drawing with a little bit of space. But the thing I got to realize, okay, this character is going to say a lot, so you needed to make sure that they were small in the panel and that there was, the dialogue was had space, or it was a big headshot so that you knew the dialogue would go over the forehead. Whatever. The point is that you kind of get used to that, but it's all that thing of laying out the page, because for me, obviously, the art side of it comes first. Not because the story isn't good. The thing is, the story is good, but the problem is what somebody sees straight away is the artwork. They haven't read it yet. They see the artwork on the page, so you're hoping that the artwork will pull them in. I mean, if you look at, you see all the old comics, the stuff that I grew up with, well, Commander Books, War Picture Library, and stuff like that. They didn't have a lot of dialogue necessarily in them, or a lot. They would have panel description things, um, but a lot of it was played out on the paper with the artwork. Then when you got to see American comic books, again, it was the reprints that I saw, reprints in British Marvel, which were beautifully in black and white. So you got a big sense of what the artists were doing and what the writer was. But the point is that the page hits you first because of the artwork.
Yeah,
It's the nature of what a comic strip is. And I don't care. I mean, writers may agree or disagree, but the artwork is the thing that has to jump out and grab the audience. Then
without a
all,
doubt.
all the subtleties of their writing can be explored so well when people are reading through the page. Anyway, those early Marvel comics that I saw, all of those were done to a plot synopsis, not fully written pages. The way Jack Kirby and Stan Lee worked, you know, some of the times Stan would give a rough plot outline,
Yeah.
and Jack would go away and do a full, like, 24-page comic book. But other times, Stanley would fire a sentence at Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby would go off and complete the whole story on the basis of the sentence, and then Stan would come along and say, "Right, what are they going to say here? I need my wonderful Shakespearean literature to be poured out on these pages." So then he would write the story. So it's very interesting, because that was the Marvel way, which has lasted it lasted through a lot of their comics, was that thing plot, and the artist broke it all down and turned it into what you saw on the page, which
Hmm.
is, whereas DC had a tendency to constantly write full scripts. And I think if you look at the comics over the years, there's a big difference in the nature of what they go for and how they affect the reader. Marvel
Yeah.
Comics did have a lovely, well, again, but it was certain artists. It's certain artists, and I mean that would leap out on both companies. And the point is, that's what you would see first, and they would be, no matter what you did, you'd come out at the end of it, and it would be like, that was a Jack Kirby comic, that was a John Buscema comic, that was a Neil Adams comic, that was a Joe Kubert comic. The thing is, their artwork overrid everything. So I'm sorry to all the writers, but that was what it was. It was like it's like
Even Stan
somebody
Lee seemed to think that. So if they try to argue it, you'd say, take it up with Stan Lee.
Stanley. It was hilarious. I remember being at an event one morning in London where there was a whole lot of artists there. We were there to meet Stanley because he was over to promote something. And Stan had his little interview, and then he came over to all the artists, and he shook our hands, and he went to the first one. He went, "Hello, I'm Stan Lee. I created Marvel Comics. What do you do?" And I'd explain. He comes to the next one. "Hello, I'm Stan Lee. I created Marvel Comics. What do you do?" And he went down the whole line, and I was looking for the key in his back, to find where he'd been walking. But he was the great Stanley, so it was fantastic, really amazing experience, but so odd, because of course all the artists start thinking about, well, wait a minute, where was Jack in this mix?
Yeah.
Because Jack Kirby is the god of comic art. Anyway, sorry. Well, what
Well,
was
when
that
you
about?
when you're talking about those different comic styles, I was quite curious. Then, whenever you went over and started doing the work for the likes of Vertigo, would you be working? when you received a script, is it like how loose would it be in terms of how you can interpret that script artistically? Were you given kind of free rein to decide how the panels would be, what the layout would be in that structure, or were there more kind of guidelines about something has to be in this panel, someone says this in this panel?
Well, yeah, DC scripts were always full scripts, so the writers would describe a panel, and then it was open to your interpretation. But thankfully, most of the writers that I worked with, in fact, I worked with one really major one, and then a bunch of other ones. But the thing was that the writers I worked with were great enough that they would describe like what was happening, but it would be wide open to the way you interpret it. You know, the great thing is you're working with somebody who is quite happy working with you, I hope, because of the fact that they know what work you do. Garth Ennis, that I worked with on Hellblazer, had, I mean, he had built his writing style out of, his love for John Wagner and Alan Grant's approach. And their approach, because I worked with Wagner and Grant for so many years on the 2000 AD stuff, their approach was such that they gave very little description. It
Hmm.
was just the information that the characters would say. It would be like, first panel, Dredd on a bike. And that would be going through Mega City 1. So that's totally open to your interpretation of
Uh
where
huh.
you put. And it's only when you've read the full script that you also see that, oh, the Dredd was going to fight these guys under a flyover. So then you'd realize, oh, I've got to get that flyover in somewhere. So this is the point. It's a nice loose thing, and then they would have the dialogue written, and you go. And Garth was very like this as well. It'd be John Constantine smoking against a wall. Well,
Hmm.
okay. I'll imagine that John Constantine smoking against the wall. That's it, and it's what he's saying or what he's reacting to. Um, Though, and Garth would also, that's with John and Alan, they would also tell you if there was something very specific. It's like there's a story I did, it was called Banana City for Wagner and Grant. And the guys had said, because it was meant to be a South American city of, no particular place, but it would have Spanish graffiti on the walls. But it was only a couple of things they wanted me to write. It was like, the Sharks and the something else. Can't even remember what the something else was, but it was two rival gangs.
Yeah.
So it's Los Tiburones or something. I can't remember. Tiburoni, who knows? Anyway, the thing was at the time when I was doing it, and I was thinking, you know, graffiti walls always have tons of graffiti. They don't have just one thing. There's
Yeah.
always come along and write over the one thing. So I started playing around with putting graffiti on the walls, and of course, it had to be Spanish graffiti. So I was looking up a Spanish phrase book and trying to put things together, create sentences. Not the way you actually create sentences, but it was
I'm just
fun.
imagining someone's graffitied on the wall. Take the next turn on the right or something.
Well, there was a lot of stuff that was there that I when they got printed, fans used to write in and say about how much they loved the graffiti. Cause I don't know how they saw it, because some of it was very, very hard to see. But the point was they would laugh about the graffiti. And of course, my editor didn't speak Spanish as far as I knew. So he, he was quite happy just looking at it and letting it go through. But, oh, I think there was things like large ladies for sale on the walls and stuff like this, and bitching out people. Anyway, the thing was, it was great fun to do, and it was one of the things that made that story really interesting for me. That I could actually add another layer of knowledge in there.
Well,
So
it's
the
not every
thing
day that you get to bitch somebody out in Spanish in a comic book on a wall. I mean, that's a unique little accomplishment you can add.
It's not. It's pretty cool, but you see, it's things like that. This is the thing that I loved about the a lot of the artists in 2000 AD. They actually had layers in their work.
Hmm.
They told the story, but they had their other, their own sense of humor is in there. Their own, layers are there. It's like when I remember Brian Bolland always had incredibly humorous stuff going on. A lot of it was the attitudes of characters in the background. Never
Yeah.
mind the Dredd and everybody else, but I mean Brian was very very good at that. And Chris Weston is like that today. I think Chris has a lot of. I mean, he's so detailed that a lot of the stuff going on in the backgrounds of Chris's work are fantastic, you know. So so the thing is, it is all down to the individual artists, what they put in. I mean, you give two artists the same script, they're going to tell the same story, but it's not going to be told in the same way.
No.
And it doesn't matter that the writer has specified stuff in it. I mean, it's like Steve Dillon. I remember Steve Dillon taking comic pages. If you saw one of the scripts after he'd worked on it, it would be he'd have a big yellow marker through bits of the description that he realized, I don't need this, I don't need this, I don't need this. And so he wouldn't draw it. He would just draw the bare minimum of what it was that he needed to get out there. I was kind of a bit more like I wanted to put in what the writers had asked for and then some of my own stuff, you know,
Uh
which
huh.
meant that I had to work longer hours trying to do this. Anyway, it's just it's what you do. You know, artwork is that thing. It's so you know, we can do so much in a piece of work, and you know that whole thing about when is it finished. You know, there has to be a point where you know that works, that's done, that works, that's done, and you move on. But you also know when it's not done.
There was an artist I was speaking to recently, a lady here in Armagh called Maria Duffy, and she had put out one of the things she said when we were doing a little painting class with her was, as soon as you put your signature on the piece, it's done. Because you could always go back and find something to slightly change. But she said once she
Well,
signs it, that's
she's
it.
pretty right. She's pretty right to a point, except sometimes recently I found myself putting in the little signature box and then realizing, oh, look, wait a minute, starting to touch on something. So she's kind of right, and on the you know the majority of times it is that the minute you put the signature on, that's it done. Yeah.
So with all that sort of comic book work, obviously you roll into the 2000s and you started to do a lot of your concept work or storyboard work for feature films. And of course, with that work, it did lead you into Game of Thrones, which, I mean, one of the most significant pop culture things of all time, without a doubt. With something and a project on the scale of that, I was curious about how it, like, where did the small little beginnings of that whole journey start in terms of, was it someone, maybe an agent who got in contact with someone, or how did this whole situation come about?
I was working on Your Highness, the feature film, and I was doing concept artwork on it as well as storyboarding. The first part of my time there was doing concepts. There was other concept artists as well doing all sort of beautiful big color paintings, and I was just drawing pencil drawings of things. They kept coming to me with, "Can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this?" And I would do my stuff, and we had a blast on that. That was a nuts film. And the thing was that my producer in that was Mark Huffam, and Mark Huffam's an amazing character that's been responsible for all sorts of things coming over here. I mean, his first, I think, it was line producer on Saving Private Ryan, which is a pretty remarkable film as well in its time, and that was down in the south of Ireland. But Mark's worked with Ridley Scott and a whole bunch of interesting people as a producer. But he was producing on Your Highness, and at a certain point in Your Highness, he came to me one day and asked me. He said, "Would you be interested in doing some kind of moonlighting on another potential TV series?" And I said, "Sure, Mark. What is it?" He said, "I can't tell you." And I said, "Well, okay, what's it about?" And he said, "Well, it's medieval fantasy." And I said, "Well, that's kind of what we're doing on this." And he said, "Yeah, but it's serious."
Yeah.
I went, "Okay." And so he asked me to meet the supervising art director. I was going to meet up with him and actually chat about what it was that they wanted illustrations done of. So I went over and they were showing me castles and kind of periods of armor and so on. So I had to go away and draw a bunch of castles, a bunch of knights in armor, um, some beheadings, and a bunch of big giant wolves. And they would give me little bits of script, but there was no headers on it, so you didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
You know, a description of something. So I went away, and I it was over a weekend and into the next week. At night time I would draw up these things, and same time I'd be doing my day job on Your Highness. And when I get delivered the artwork, I went back to just doing Your Highness, and they sent it away to America. I knew it was going to somewhere, but I didn't know to who. So I get back on with Your Highness, living the life of insanity with those guys. And uh, Mark came to me partway through and said, "We've got Game of Thrones." And I said, "Oh, is that what I was working on?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Okay, brilliant. Do I get a job out of this?" And he said, "Absolutely." So when I would finish Your Highness, I was going to move over to Game of Thrones, um, which was only trying to set up at that time. There was so few people in town, and so it was like a Wednesday I finished on Your Highness, and on Thursday I was on Game of Thrones doing stuff, and that was just amazing because the thing was, right, there was a bunch of different drafting artists there, who would be working on buildings and stuff like that,
Uh huh.
doing the plans and stuff, but they only had me there as an artist, and so the thing was, they hadn't even determined what I was at that point. They put me working with the props department in a sense, and initially because the first thing I got to do was design the weapons. So all those hero weapons like Ice and Needle and Longclaw and Cat's Paw and the White Walker weapons and stuff, I got to design. So that was the
Wow.
first thing I was doing, and then there was a couple of carriages for Cersei that I drew up, and there was and then there was some other stuff to go along with weapons, like for especially for the Dothraki characters. It wasn't just bits of weapons; it was a bit more of the stuff they would have over the horses and things like this. And all of that was they were nice pencil illustrations. Really, it was like I was on something when I was doing that. It was
Uh
like
huh.
something had taken over because every day I was doing drawings that I was really happy with. I couldn't believe it. It was like this stuff was just turning out of me.
Yeah.
And it was almost like I'd stepped into Conan. And of course, one of the characters I've always loved, never got to do, but Conan, amazing. So the thing is, I was working through this stuff, and then they came and asked me about we need White Walkers. So I got to sit down and do a painting of the White Walkers. I did a few paintings, and that was like the basis of what they used to create the White Walker characters. So
There
it's
was
like
one
this.
painting actually in particular when we are talking about those White Walker paintings, and I believe it might be one you're referencing. But I remember seeing it years ago when I just recently again came across it when I was looking stuff up for our talk today. And it was a painting of, I believe it must have been used for that first little cold open where guys from they go beyond the wall. And it's a painting that seems to be a point of view looking through the trees because it's framed by these trees on the other end with one of the White Walkers on the dead horse. Would that have been one of those early
Oh,
paintings that you would have did?
the Dead Horse one. Oh, it depends because you might have seen one that was right at the end of the Game of Thrones series because there's one where they all come out of the woods, and it's a pretty good dead horse and a pretty creepy White Walker.
That
But
was a great painting.
there's another one that was um, at the end of season two where the description was for an armored White Walker in the storyboards.
Uh huh.
I'd drawn up the storyboard, and Sam's hiding out behind a rock, and the Walker comes past on the horse, and then it stops, and the Walker looks into where Sam is, and Sam's quaking in fear, and the Walker just moves on. He's leaving him, and all the army of the dead are walking behind him, but he's an armored White Walker, and the painting I did of that White Walker was because I'd been asked, could I color up a panel for the American Blu-ray to be released with a card in it,
Yeah.
and I can't just color up a bloody frame. I thought, so I sat down and did a painting of the frame. So it's this armored, and it's very blue painting, and this guy's looking out towards us, and I probably was influenced by Frazetta's Death Dealer character, but the point was, here is this character, and that went off to be printed as a card that was only with the American Blu-rays.
Uh
The
huh.
British Blu-rays never got them. European Blu-rays never got them. It was just the American ones.
Left out
Uh,
again.
I know, but it's cool, It's just what it is. But the thing is when they filmed the sequence, of course, they they kind of didn't do the armor, and all you get is this wispy blue guy on a horse with his hair wisping about the
Yeah.
place. Uh, and I just was so kind of, ah, oh, come on, guys, you're going for the hard hair, and what do we get? We get wispy blue guy. Anyway, so, yeah, there's a bunch of paintings that I did, and the thing is, um, you know, I was the other thing. I kept my White Walker and all my storyboards the way I liked them. I didn't. I didn't kind of. I kind of, just kept drawing what I like drawing, as opposed
You
to.
wanted the badass armor version, not the L'Oreal commercial
Well,
version.
there's, 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 that was the only one that had the armor. The rest of them don't. But the thing is, I still wanted. There's bits of armor because that's the other thing. It was like, I don't know if I've imagined this or whether George Martin had described this somewhere, but there was a thing that was like with ice armor, maybe it was just me, but I would compose
I
stuff
believe it's
that.
in the books. He talks about the specific
uh,
armor that they would have worn being like that. Yeah.
so the thing was, I was thinking all this stuff out about how did this stuff work, and I was thinking of, right, if a bit gets chipped off, does it reform itself because it's ice? Is it because again we're talking
Yeah.
about mythical creatures, and wounds that would just heal up because they were these freakazoids. Anyway, and of course they're ice swords. Their swords were made of ice. They had to be super strong, whatever the hell they were.
Yeah.
Um, and you're thinking ice against steel, but anyway, it was cool. There's all that's the thing. You got so into the characters, you got so into the idea of what you were trying to tell that you took it so seriously. I mean, that's the thing. I think why it worked so well, that loads of people invested serious mental time in this. You were living in a way within that world. Like, you worked such long hours, and then you would come back, and the stuff would still be going around, and you'd be thinking how to approach certain things. And you offered up ideas to your directors when they were talking to you, some of which would be taken on board, and other stuff wouldn't be. Sometimes it was completely off center because they were going to be going down a different route. So, but the thing was, it's not the fact that you would come up with something that was wrong. It's the fact that you were that invested in it, that you cared enough to want to do
Yeah.
that sort of. That's what was so important to me with Thrones. I really loved it. I cared what I was doing.
Well, when you were talking about designing the armor for that White Walker for your painting, it seems obvious, like I would imagine from the outside looking in, that whenever you're designing the weapons that you talked about in the beginning, there's obvious reference material you can go to. You can look throughout history to find the designs for weapons and armor. Same with the Dothraki, you can look into other cultures and what they would have used. When it came to doing the White Walker armor, what would have been the reference or the kind of feeling that you went to whenever you tried to produce that?
One paragraph in George R. R. Martin's book.
Pretty good place
I
to
mean,
get. Yeah, great place to get your reference, to be fair.
because if you remember, I mean, I don't know if you've read all those books.
I
The thing
have,
was, I
yeah. Still waiting on the next one.
better than me. I read the first one, and the first one was. I figured I needed to read it if I was going to be going to do this series. So between the time I did my drawings and finding out what it was, and then starting on the show, I had read the first book, and there's one paragraph description of George R. R. Martin's White Walkers, and that's it, one paragraph, and because they don't appear again,
Hmm.
in that first, there's no sign of them again. But he set it up so that you knew that these guys were obviously a threat somewhere, but you forget it
Yeah.
until near the end. Then you're thinking, "Oh heck, what's coming?" And it's not just Ned's head; it's something else. And the thing was, I remember that description just carved an image in my head. So when I went to paint it, and I did it, like, I started one day and I finished it the second day and handed it over to the guys, as their reference point, and then I did another one and so on. And the thing was, it was just that thing. You went with the image that was in your head. You didn't get into relying on a whole bunch of other stuff. It was just, what's there? What am I thinking? And yeah, it would be a great, like, a heavy metal rock album cover.
Yeah.
It's like if you stick a guitar on them, it would work really well. Anyway, the point is,
Make a very
it
good
was
sort of Iron Maiden cover or something like that.
like that. It was kind of cool. Anyway, but that's a lot of these things. somebody asks you where your reference point is. Well, certainly with the weaponry and so on throughout the story. Any of the weaponry that I got to design, you ask the questions. Gemma, who was the first production designer, she knew, kind of the areas she was wanting to go into with that stuff. And we had a really brilliant props artist on there, uh, props designer, and she was fantastic. I'm sorry, it's so long ago I've forgotten her name, but the point was she was fantastic, and I used to have chats with her when it came to well, which area are we taking kind of our basis from? What are we looking at? And there was stuff from India, there was stuff from um, Arabic countries, there was it depended on what it was. The stuff with the Starks was all very, very stark. It was all rough, raw Scottish type stuff,
Yeah.
and lots of northern influences. The Lannister stuff was very bejeweled and very kind of decadent, and so it was the European styled stuff. It was fantastic. The weapons were great fun to do, but that was the whole point. Same with any of the armor drawings or concept pieces that I was. You see, a lot of the time, if I wanted to know what the sword was like, I'd have to draw the character. So I would draw character drawings as well. I figured they might be useful. I would draw character drawings, and the weaponry they would have would be what I'd been designing, and I needed to find how it sat on them, how it worked with them, to kind of get the weight right in my mind.
Yeah.
So I did some really nice character drawings, and all of that was all, as I say, working towards what these things would be. The influences were definitely all over the world when it came to the um, physical characters. The White Walkers was a different thing because of the fact that it was fantasy imagination and it was
Yeah.
going by George's book paragraphs. Um, and then later on, you see, I remember I bought the second book that I was intending to read it, but I was called out to Los Angeles to do to work out the ideas for Blu-ray drawings and stuff because they were going to animate stuff in the ancient histories. So I was out there and I had such a nice time with my friend Adam, who was the guy in charge, and Adam would take me around Los Angeles in the evenings. So we'd work during the day on the ideas, and then in the evenings we'd be out in Los Angeles. I never got a chance to read the damn book. I get on the plane, I'm coming back home, and I think I'll read it there, and I got it. I'd done about, I don't know, 4 chapters or something like that. Got back home, and I was only home a little while when I got a call from the production office about could I go in because they had a big sequence that they wanted to try and work out. The director wasn't going to be in town for a while, but could I look at it? So I went in, and it was the Battle of Blackwater Bay, and
Yeah.
I did my first really big sequence um, of drawings because of the fact that I was trying to draw from every little bit of information in the script, and also knowing that they would be picking through finding what it was that they would want, and of course they picked through it to find out how much it would cost and realize, oh, there's too much money there to do that, too much to do that. Let's try and get this whittled down. So then they would go to David and Dan to get the script rejigged, and then the director came to town. So then it was another version. But the point was, because I was called in early, I got given the 10 scripts for season 2. So I sat and read the 10 scripts. Then I didn't need to read the book,
No.
so so I never read the book. So and then the same thing happened when it came to season 3. Before season 3 starts, I went and bought the third book. I go off out to Los Angeles, don't get to read the book, a couple of chapters maybe into it, have a really good time with Adam, do all the working out the ideas, come back and get ready to start doing the stuff with Adam. And so I put the book aside for a little bit. Then I got another call about, could you come in? We've got this sequence that it would be good to work out in advance. So it was like, okay, I'll come in and do that. And then I got the 10 scripts, so I read the 10 scripts, and then I realized I don't need
There
to
we
read.
go.
And then at the end of that, I said, "That's it. I'm not buying another George R. R. Martin.
I'm not putting more money
I'm
into
not
George's
putting more
pocket.
money into George.
He's got
George."
enough. I mean, it's such a mammoth undertaking to go in and read them, and I always attributed the only reason that I actually got through all of them when I did was I was working in a restaurant in Victoria Square in Belfast at the time, and we were right up at the very, very top. And if anyone's familiar with the area, the designated smoking area for that restaurant was all the way down the front where the kitchen bar was. And
Oh,
I
right,
didn't smoke.
serious?
I didn't smoke, so I convinced my supervisor that I did because I knew when it was busy, say it was a weekend or it was around Christmas time, in order for me to get down there, have a smoke, and get back up, that's a solid 20, 25 minutes. So I used to just say, I'm going to smoke, I'm going to first a cigarette here. And I would go down and I would just walk into one of the other little cafes. I would have a little takeout cup of coffee I'd already made. I would just sit down and read through the book. And I would do that 2 or 3 times throughout the day. So not only was I reading it, but I was getting paid to read it. Otherwise, I never would have got through them.
But I've always thought it's been very unfair that smokers get their smokers break, and
Exactly.
everybody else doesn't get any kind of break.
There's
So
no
yeah, I
allowance
think
for I'm reading a giant book break. There wasn't any
uh,
sort of thing. So I just had to
no,
make
but there
my
should
own.
be. Yep, I think it's a great idea. Yeah, I like that.
Well,
Anyway,
having lived in Westeros then for all of those years, you then moved into not just your illustration stuff, you moved into some writing stuff with what's sitting right behind me here, VMT, which
yeah,
VMT, is it the first published thing that you'd written, or like, do you have any other work out that was authored by you too?
I have little tiny short stories in some things. There's a fan magazine in Belfast called Sector 13, which I did some stuff for. Just basically, I was amusing myself, and the guys were so nice, and I just, yeah, sure, I'll do something if you fancy. So there's been a couple of characters that I've worked on that I would like to do a lot more of, and actually, but it's set back in like a prehistory time. So I have a big story that I want to work on, but that's going to take some time. Anyway, the thing is, no, the VMT is my first proper, legitimate published piece of work. Um, and that's really because I'd started writing a load of film scripts. While there was another part of my life where my brother and I had an animation company for a little while, and we were pushing our own ideas. So the thing was, I'd started to write stuff there. We would brainstorm, and I'd end up writing things because somebody had to do it. So it ended up being me. And then I thought, oh, I like this, and I started writing some other short stories um, to put into the film commission to try and get them made. And I ended up making a short film, which nobody was able to see yet because it's never been put out yet because of the fact there's been little things I wanted to tweak on it, like doing artwork, and so it's been sitting around for quite a lot of years. But it's a little film called Cornered, so maybe someday you'll get to see it. And it was
Okay.
something I really enjoyed doing. And then out of Cornered, doing some commercials, and I did a little music video thing, and there was a bunch of stuff that was happening because of the directing side of things. So writing, directing, all cool, really liking that. And then I started writing. I had a science fiction story that I wrote, which was it's like a short. But then I kind of went on because a friend had said, "Have you thought about doing a feature?" So I went on and wrote this feature. Um, and I realized this I've written a big feature, and I can see the imagery in my head. I could draw this one up. And I realized also it would probably cost $100 million to make. And I thought to myself, maybe I better write something that's cheaper. So then
Yeah.
I write another story. I wrote a thriller, which I figured was a lot cheaper. But again, I was told that would probably be about $26 million to do. And then I thought, oh heck. And then so I decided I'd write again. I'd try another thing that is even cheaper. So I was writing this what I figured would be a cheap movie, and then there was a low budget feature film competition here in Belfast with the Film Commission, and there was meant to be something like 500 entries when I stuck in my script, and then I'd heard I was in the last five, and I was thinking to myself,
Wow.
pretty good. That means
Yeah.
these other people, I've done a film that they figured is the last five, and it was a road movie. And the film that won was a road movie. It just wasn't my road movie, but there I was. So then I was like, there was number one, and then there was four other scripts, and so the other four scripts could be number two. So the thing was, I had this. I kind of thought, well, that's a brilliant kind of booster that your work was worthy enough of
Yeah.
getting that close to the end. So then I also had issues. Elaine and I had issues with DC because of the fact that Vamps is still being held by them at the moment, and we wanted to do other stuff.
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to say on that at the moment. But it made me start doing little short stories about a bunch of other vampire characters because I was still interested in doing them, and I was doing these while I was working on film projects. So it's been over a bunch of years. But I'd also done a piece of work for Renegade, 24 Hours in London, a comic strip which was based on a movie that was my first movie that I ever storyboarded. It was a very low budget movie, very low budget for me. Um, and but I figured, yeah, how difficult can it be? I was asked about doing it. I said it's a comic strip. So basically, I did that and really enjoyed doing it. Then I'd done a couple of short films here in Belfast. I mean, for other people. I made the big mistake of going onto a film set one day and realizing I love this because somebody handed me a beer and a sandwich, and I thought to myself, "This is the best life."
It's great.
Because
Living my best life.
yeah, as an onlooker, and then Ken and I were doing our animation stuff, but during that time, um, there was other there was other productions happening, and it made sense to work on some of them to try and make some money. And I ended up working on the first then film that I got was a thing called Cocoon, which was a Spike Milligan story. It was a crazy film, but I did my couple of weeks of storyboarding, and then the money allocated for that was gone, and they had another job as an assistant standby prop, and I thought I'll take that. So that was 6 weeks of being on a film set
Yeah.
and being on a set, from really early in the morning, late at night. And the thing was, I learned so much about filmmaking while I was there. I made all the mistakes I could ever make. I walked in front of camera. I flipping smoked up the room too much. I There's a whole bunch of stuff, cables you have to watch out for. But in the end, the job that I liked the most was the directors, and I thought I could do that. So the thing is, it was then I think that I wrote Cornered, and it was then that I put it into the film commission. It was then that I ended up getting to do it. So it took another like 2 years or something, but I ended up being able to make the short film, and that's what boosted me on to writing more stuff. So with VMT, it was one of those things that, as I said, Vamps was in my head as being something that we had never gotten to a conclusion with. Elaine and I would like to do more. And the problem was that it wasn't happening with DC, and that's a whole other big kettle of fish as well
Yeah.
to do with different people's attitudes and so on. And so the thing was, I started writing scenarios for VMT, but because Alex at Renegade had said to me, "Oh, he'd seen some of the artwork, and could we do this?" And I said, "You're serious? Absolutely." So I went away, and I said, "But it's going to take whatever time it's going to take because I am working on film and so on." So it was being done in bits in between film, and then you were going back and altering things. So it took a long time, but in the end, it's a first solid, legitimate tale that I've told that's actually out there. It could have been a movie, but instead, it's this book that I did,
I mean,
and
I get
I
that.
have
When I read it, I actually felt like it almost seems like it was perfectly set up for an adaptation. So it's interesting to see that that's kind of how it came into existence.
yeah. Well, the other thing, can I say, the other thing about all of this is all my life when I've been drawing, I've been influenced by film. It's always been there. It's a major thing. I would sit watching film when I'd be drawing on my knee and so on, and I continue that to the present day. And the thing is that I guess film storytelling may well be embedded in my head, but the thing with VMT was that it was going to be a comic book, and I knew I'd never written it to be a film script. I knew it was always going to be a comic book. I'm just saying that it could be like Vamps, Elaine's Vamps. You know, Hollywood wanted to make two movies, or two Hollywood companies wanted to make a movie. Anyway, and that has been, just it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
Um, and the thing is, when I'm working on my own characters, I know they could go that way. Now, if I was writing it as a film script, I would be writing it slightly differently, because that's the other thing. I've now worked on so many film scripts,
Hmm.
I kind of know the approach to go with. And what I mean, I've worked with Neil Jordan 3 times, and his film scripts are just beautiful. They are so perfect to work from.
Yeah.
Um, a real page turners. You just do not stop turning the page. Anyway, the thing is with that side of things, I know the approach to write with that. With comic books, I also know it's a different approach because there's other things one has to do in a comic page, and you don't want to have like 15 pages of no dialogue or no information going
Yeah.
on. You want to have the two things running in parallel, where you're doing your artwork, but you're and telling the story, but you're also telling another insight into the story while you're writing it. And I hope that mostly that's where I got to with VMT, that there's different things running along side by side in there, and a lot of it's my gripes about all sorts of things, and the fact that I like vampires to be bloody and messy and nasty, as opposed to being
Quite interesting when you mention about your
I
gripes.
should warm my
One of the things I find very interesting is I have limited time these days for reading or watching anything because a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old and everything else, the day job, this stuff, my own illustrations, it takes up so much time. And I always find that whether it's a comic book, whether it's a TV show, a movie, whatever it is, it needs to grab me instantly. And I would always think back to I consider probably the greatest comic book of the 2010s was a brilliant comic by Image called Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples, and it opens the first 2 or 3 pages of it, grab you instantly, and I got the exact same feeling with VMT. Like that opening
that
page or
good
two is
good one.
incredible. Oh no, fantastically to the point where you're like, oh well, there's no way I'm not finishing this right from the very beginning. But when I read it, the one thing I do remember thinking is, why does Will hate BMW drivers so much?
Oh, I have had so much trouble with you don't have a BMW, do you?
I
I've had
don't. I don't. No. No.
so much
No.
trouble with BMW drivers, and it's an attitude thing, and it's only actually. So all you wonderful BMW drivers that have different colored BMWs, okay, it's the fact that there's people that drive black BMWs who seem to have an attitude within them that I have found. I've encountered them on the road and they are not gracious. I have encountered them on the road where there's nowhere else to go except the pavement, and they're refusing to get up on the pavement. And yet you're sitting there going, well, look, I can't do anything, so it's up to you. They're the ones that will not reverse, even if their place they can reverse to is only a little bit along, and for you to go backwards is like miles. It's that attitude. It's like, be a bit more gracious on the road, be kinder to people on the road. And that is why Son beats the shit out of a BMW at the beginning of the story. Because
And no apologies when she realizes it isn't even the right BMW. No apologies whatsoever.
no
In
apologies.
fact, attacks him.
Well, he needed attacking.
He
He was
did. Yeah, he did.
foul mouth at her, you know what I mean? The girl didn't need that.
If someone if how would you kind of pitch VMT to anyone who hasn't read it?
Oh no, oh, I'm not prepared.
No, no, no.
It's it's three wonderful bloody individuals that have got all of their own hang-ups and considerations of life and lives that they've lived because they've been there so long, except for one of them. And what else? What else? What else? What else? It's delving into strange bloody histories, and also weird characters out of ancient literature, and it's a setup for another book because because
Brilliant.
this must go on. But yeah, there are three really self-empowered women, and there's a fourth character in there. There's another self-empowered woman, and I love strong female characters that are going to go out there and do their thing, and they've got a reason to do it, and they've got opinions, and I have no excuse for being a man enjoying writing this thing and it being bloody and nasty and so on, because it has to be, like we were talking about Hellblazer. Horror needs to have mess, and it needs to be nasty, and nasty things have got to happen, and the things that turn you into a quivering wreck is the kind of things that you must put into your horror. It's like it has to be stuff that upsets you, and loads of the stuff in the book upsets me, and they probably upset other people when they look at, oh my god, what he wrote. But the point is, no, it's a horror comic, and I like it, and I'm going to do more of it. So whether you buy it or not, there's going to be another one out there, and I'm
Well, I would
going
personally
to.
say that you absolutely should go and buy it. Like, it is fantastic, and not only every way that you described it, I would also say it is very, very funny. Like when there's humor put in there, it lands every single time. Like even the confession box scene. I think there was the great line where, what is the line? You could say that I was converted, and the priest saying, "What to Protestantism?" Just said, is that the worst thing that can happen in your world? Was just I'm reading, and I remember thinking,
Very well
that's
remembered. That's
fantastic.
pretty good. I'd
I
forgotten
thought it was
that.
great. Like I've read over it. I got it back in December. It was Colin give me the book to read, and then I've read it once when he first gave it to me, and I recently went and reread it again, and it's just fantastic. So really, really happy to hear there'll be more.
Well, I'm working away on the next lot, and it's but you know that no, that's really nice. I'm glad you got that because the thing is, when you think of our the world of Northern Ireland and the insane calamity that happened with all the murders and killings and bombs going off and all sorts of things, and you think of what the reasoning was kind of put into our heads as to what it was all about. Religion is so fucked up. Sorry, it
Yep,
is. It's
your
a mess.
grand, honestly, yeah.
Real mess. Anyway, but it is, and it's like, but you see, that's the thing. One of the things with Mercy is that she's obviously decided that a long time ago, and her
Yeah.
version of why things are happening, and the people that she actually goes after, she's totally open to all different religions.
Uh huh.
She'll eat every one of them. it's,
It's just a big buffet.
it's a big
But
buffet.
I've been imploring every single person I know who reads comics that they have to pick it up, and I'm going to make sure that there's a link to the Amazon page in the description of the video. BMT, like absolutely, if you're interested in comics, if you like blood, if you like horror, if you like sweary and quite humorous as well, make sure like head on over and check it. It is a fantastic piece of work.
Oh my God. Well, thank you, Jonathan, for that. That's a really nice thing for you to say. I'm
You
very
are very
pleased.
welcome. You're
I'm
very, very
glad I could.
welcome. Plug, plug, plug. And I think a plug is probably the best place for us to leave it here today because I am going to wrap things up and I will let you get back to whatever you're doing. But thanks so much. It's been absolutely fantastic having you on here. Oh.
Look at that. It's going. Oh my goodness. Oh, it's because of my batteries failing.
Oh,
Your
no,
time.
no problem. What I'll do is we'll wrap it up. Thanks so much. And I'll see you again next week on the next episode.